y'all, I'm Hope at Crafty Hope and welcome. It is time for the week 29 mixed media prompt card for hashtag Crafty Hope prompts. As you can see, I've got a whole array of cards I've created, and these have all been made by pulling 3 prompts a week each Monday and using those prompts to alter both sides of this card. One side I make my decorative side and one side is my functional side with the prompt words on them. And this is basically building me up a prompt deck using just a regular old deck of playing cards. I have a full list of the 156 prompts that I am using to pull from below if you want to play along. And you can do that by either go ahead and using the prompts I pull every week or by pulling your own. Like I said, I'm on week 29. This is week 29. But if you want to start now and do it, go for it. And you don't have to make a card. I am pulling the prompts and making the cards. Y'all, I must be overexcited or something. I'm pulling the prompts and making my cards for my prompt deck every Monday. But then, so I'm not boxing myself into just cards. On Saturdays, I have a different project that I am doing every week using those exact same 3 prompts. For week 28, with the prompts Splatter, Scratch, and Triangle, I made this card. And then I created this little wood panel. So I will have links to those for you so you can do that, but also at the end of this video there should be a full playlist of all of my videos along with some of the other people who have played along as well using that hashtag Crafty Hope prompts. And if you play along, I hope you'll use that hashtag as well, either here on Instagram or wherever you go for your social media. Alright guys, it is time to pull the week 29 prompts. So we're going to put up these previous week cards and put them aside and try to keep them from toppling because they're getting, y'all, they're so thick. It's crazy. Okay, so we're going to pull 3 prompts. So I pull out these and let's see. I am going to have my first prompt is going to be embossed paper. So all that means is some kind of paper with a raised surface on it. I have one of those Sizzix Big Kicks, and I'm going to use an embossing folder and run some paper through it, and then use that paper somehow on my card and then in my project later. If you do not have like embossing folders or a embossing machine of some kind, you can use like embossed scrapbook paper, or even if you have like an embossed invitation to a wedding or something, or you can use embossing powder maybe and emboss something like that. But I'm just talking about like textured paper. So even the if you want to just do something super easy with some textured paper, maybe the corrugated inside of some cardboard or some other kind of paper you may have on hand that just has like a raised or textured surface. You don't have to get real fancy with it. Okay, so embossed paper. That is number 1. That is going to be interesting. Y'all, these cards are... Woo! Okay. Our prompt number 2 is acrylic paint. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. That is any kind of acrylic paint, whether it's craft paint or artist quality paints, but just some kind of acrylic paint. I am already envisioning doing a dry brush technique with the acrylic paint onto the embossed paper, so that is an option. But we'll see what happens. You know, things never come together exactly the way I envisioned them the first time, so we'll see what happens. All right. That is prompts 1 and 2. Prompt number 3 is going to be seam binding. All right, y'all, that is a sewing supply, and I have this on my list because I have tons of it. I think I do. If I haven't purged it, I will find it. But it is basically just this stuff that you put like on the edges of quilts to make the seams to, I don't know. I don't know exactly what it's used for. I don't really sew. I just know that's what the packaging says is seam binding. If you do not have specifically seam binding, maybe cut off the seam of something. Like I've got these towels that have these folded seams on them, and you could cut that off and maybe just use that, maybe not the towel like this, but maybe a flour sack towel or an old shirt that you're using in the fabric for, or some other kind of seam might work. So yeah, this is going to be kind of chunky, I think. I don't know how I'm going to get these on both sides of this, but we'll see what happens. And maybe I'll just use some thin paper to emboss as opposed to something too thick and crunchy. All right, I'm gonna go gather some things and I will be back in just a second. Whew, there's a lot going on here. Okay, so I'm gonna talk you through my things. So embossed paper, acrylic paint, and seam binding. So for embossed paper, I'm gonna go ahead and emboss some paper. Since I wanna keep this fairly thin, I went and picked out fairly thin papers. I've got some dictionary paper, an old book page. This is something from some kind of old pamphlet. This is just some, it's kind of thick white paper that somebody sent me, so I don't even know what it is, but it's nice. Could be construction paper. No, I don't know what it is. And then this is from the ad section of an old yearbook. All of these are still fairly thick, but not super thick. And then I've got a nice little selection of some embossing folders, and we'll go through running those through in a second. Acrylic paint, I'm not super worried about. I've got a whole cart full of them. And then the last one is seam binding. So I wanted to show you, I don't know if you can even see this. I have this shoebox size container that's got different things. So I've got these, which are almost all lace design seam binding. And I know that they're seam binding because I have this here that says stretch lace seam binding, and it is lace. And so all of these other laces I have in here are, well, not all of them, but most of them are these like seam binding laces. But there's also, what did I do with it? See, I also have bias tape, which if that's what you've got, I suppose you could use. I'm trying to find the other seam binding I have. So this is iron-on seam binding, and it is like ribbon-ish. So if you don't, again, if you don't have seam binding and you don't want to use like the seam of something, use lace or ribbon or something like that as a replacement. Those are just my suggestions, because when I put seam binding on there, I meant any of these things in this shoebox that I have. Okay, we're going to get to embossing, I think, real quick. You can see that some of my papers are larger than we'll go through my machine. So I'll be cutting some of those down first and then running them through, and we'll see what happens. I did start by cutting down this piece of, what was it? That was the pamphlet-y thing, I think. When I say pamphlet, it was like some kind of booklet for some business that they apparently sent out to possible people. But I cut that down, and cutting down a little bit more and then putting it in my little embossing folder, and then kind of cutting around that just to make sure it fits in the embossing folder. And I'm looking at the raised surfaces because I wanted the portion with all the words on it there to be more raised than the other side, but it doesn't really matter with this folder. So I'll make my little sandwich by putting the other plate there on top and then turning the crank you can't see off camera so everything slides through, and I wind up with this textured paper. Super cool. So I did that with all these other papers. Running them through. I'm not going to use all of these. This one we'll see later. It just far too delicate. That book page, just too delicate. Everything else came through just fine, but that for that, I like that ticket embossing folder, but I think I'm going to have to use some other kind of paper on it because yeah, that didn't work. So I went back to that original one I had with the like rainbow kind of scallop shape on it, and putting down some acrylic matte medium, and I'm gonna just go ahead and put that straight onto my card. I was trying real hard to get that adhered without pressing out all of the embossing. There's a step here I'll do in just a minute, and you'll see that I did press it down a little too much in a couple areas, but it really doesn't matter. As long as most of it is raised, it's okay. So I'm trimming off the excess real quick. Like I said, trying not to rub it. So when I'm rubbing it, I'm doing it softly and I'm not doing it too hard. So I decided to go ahead and use my Oohoo glue stick to just to get those last little areas. And yeah, again, rubbing it where I shouldn't be rubbing it. So I brought in some Distress Oxide and Blueprint Sketch, and I'm going to pull that over the whole of it. So you can see up there at the top where I kept rubbing it, that it's kind of, that design isn't showing up because I had pressed it in a little bit in my trying to get it down. Now I'm trying to find a paintbrush and wet it so that I can get that blueprint sketch to kind of go into some of the areas. It did not do a great job. I don't think I got enough ink on there, for one thing, because I was trying to be delicate and not press on it. But also, that paper was kind of weird. It was shiny but not shiny, and I don't know. I've got some ideas for when I do my project with this, and we'll see what happens. So here's me thinking, okay, well, I'll use some of these tickets that I embossed through, and y'all, they were just falling apart. So like I pulled this one off, and I was like, now we're gonna just move forward. So I flipped over to the other side and decided to go ahead and collage down just a piece of dictionary paper that was on my desk. It actually may have been the other side of the page I had embossed. Maybe not. I think it was something that was on my desk. So again, using that acrylic medium to glue it down, and then I'll trim off the excess. And I was trying to go ahead and work on my more decorative side before my functional side this time. It doesn't work out. I'm going to end up doing the functional side first, and which is fine, because if it gets messed up, then that's okay. But yeah, so I tried working on something for a little while. You can see I've got some paint and stuff there. There's green paint that's now on my desk that wasn't there. And it's something that's not really going to come into this. You'll see there's the little green things on the desk, and they're little leafy things of something I emboss, and I'll try to bring them in later. They just don't work, but I got green paint out and some other things, and I'll bring that in later. So I took some of that gray seam binding there and cut it down, and it's going to be the backer for my prompt words. But first I needed to get acrylic paint on this card. So I decided to put a little bit, this is some kind of fuchsia something, just craft paint, and I wet it down nicely, splattered it. I know splatter was last week, but y'all, I'm always going to have a little splatter and everything. And I dried it. Once it was dry, I did cut down my prompt words, and I'm inking the edges with, whatchamacallit, I think it's walnut stain distress ink is what it is. And y'all, you can see I zoomed in here to give y'all a better look at what I'm doing. It felt like, I don't know, like it was too far away to be seen. And this is going to be a problem here in a little bit because I keep getting off screen. So I apologize here in advance that in a little bit I will be slightly off screen. Alright, so those are inked and everything, and I'm taking my Uhu glue stick and gluing my words to my bit of gray seam binding there, and that's that regular iron-on seam binding, not the lace seam binding, at least on this side. So, and I'm going to stick these down. I've got all three of those prompts. I've got embossed paper, I've got seam binding, I've got acrylic paint. The functional side does not have to be fancy. It just has to have the words and be kind of pretty. So, I'm going to put those down, and I'm going to go ahead and write the number 29 in the top right corner because this is week 29. And then I'm going to flip over and start futzing with that side. So there are those things I embossed and tried to color, and it just didn't work. I decided I wanted like a length of this ruler embossing I had done. So I'm going to cut it down real quick. And then I'm going to bring in a nonstick craft sheet because the next thing I want to do is color that a little. And I know I could have used some acrylic paint, it is my prompt, but I decided to use these walnut ink crystals that I had mixed with water and just kind of put it straight onto that ruler type embossed thing, and I sprayed it. It's super wet, so I'm gonna kind of move that around a little and then dry everything. So I'm not just using a towel. I'll bring in my heat gun here, it's hard to see right there, and take a little bit of time and get that dry. Once it's dry, I'm going to try that dry brush technique that I was talking about. I first try it with this super light taupe brown color, and almost immediately I'm like, that is not doing a thing for me. So I go across it going, maybe I can get it on there. And it really kind of just pushes the brown back a little. So I bring in a parchment, I think, craft paint. Yeah, this one it is. I think it's an old, like a really old Americana one. You can see well, you could have seen the label a second ago. But I do the same thing. I'm just kind of dry brushing over the top of where the numbers are on this. And yeah, it's not doing anything yet. So the last thing I'm going to bring in is some black. And again, this is how I'm bringing acrylic paint into this card this time. So I've got my black here. I'll bring some more acrylic paint in a second too, but so I'm dry brushing the black over like where the marks are and where the numbers are on here. And now they're showing up. Hey, look at that. The black did what I wanted, but the other two colors kind of help give it a little bit of an aged, distressed feel in the background. I don't know what I was aiming for, but I think this is something I need to play with some more. And I'd love to see how y'all use this embossed paper prompt. Even if you don't do like an embossing photo like that, if you do some other kind of textured or raised paper in some way. Okay, so I have got that. I'm going to look at my card. I know I need to do something to the background of it. So I'm moving my ruler out the side and I'm using this green paint that I had out before, and I can't remember the color. It's like something moss something. But I just kind of wet it down really nicely and moved it around on the card. And then I've got that taupey color again that I'm going to bring in to kind of pull it out. So here is also acrylic paint in here. Yeah, see, that's where I'd gotten off screen. So it's not a big deal. It's, see, I kind of just did a slash with the green down the middle, and I'm using that taupey color to kind of just move it around. Yeah, like kind of in a watercolor style. So once I get that, I decided to use some of that walnut ink just to bring that same color back in, and I'll splatter it on the card. It is wet, so that because I use so much water on my brush when I put those other two down, that's super watery, and that walnut ink kind of moves around quite a bit. So now I'm going to do some of the green splatters as well, just to kind of get some of that green in more of an opaque manner. It didn't work great. And ink the edges of the card just to frame it up and like bring that in. Okay, so from there it's time to, I decided it wasn't dark enough. I needed something dark on here. I'd already decided at this point that I was going to use a Tim Holtz paper doll, and those are black and white images, so I needed some black on the card. So using my Stabilo all pencil, I made some little marks all over it, and I'll use a super tiny paintbrush that's wet to just activate that Stabilo to get that black on there like I like. And I think I'm also going to take that little paintbrush and wet the tip of my Stabilo and try to do a little bit of splatter with it as well. Yeah, that's what I'm going to do. And it's not much, just a little something. And I did try that. Once it was dry, I've got this lace seam binding that I'm going to put on my card. So I'm using my Uhu again, putting that straight onto my card and then sticking the lace into it. So that is a little less fussy than trying to put the glue on the lace, I promise. And then I'm going to futz around a little bit. That's the paper doll I'm using. But I'm going to futz around with the placement of my ruler a little bit and maybe adding more of that seam binding. But no, I kind of put it there and look at the girl and I'm like, yep, that's what I like. So I'll put more of the Who right on the card. And I'm letting the edges of that hang off just a little. I wanted the lace to hang off, but not the ruler. But I wanted to hang off because I had one end that didn't have as much color on it, and I didn't want that to be the part on there. So here's a little bit of gold acrylic paint that I'm putting a little bit on my finger and then rubbing that over those numbers again to accent those numbers. This you should be able to see in my detail shots at the end, because it's kind of hard for me to see if it's coming up here on the viewfinder, not viewfinder, but in my editing program.
So once I get down there, of course, I'm like, well, if I'm going to put gold there, I might as well have some splatter. So I'm just using the little bit of gold that's in the cap off of that tube and my little wet paintbrush and splatter it. It is impossible to see, but once it dries, it pops a little bit more. It's so funny with gold paint that it does that. So I'll dry it and then I'm going to ink the edges of my little girl. And this is all done again with the Distress ink in Walnut Stain. And I'll glue her down with some Fabri-Tac. I think I end up, that's one of those things that kind of goes off camera. And I don't know if you can tell, but that dictionary page that I use, it has up in the upper right corner, the word lace is there. And I thought that was kind of perfect since I used that lace seam binding. So I kind of was making sure I didn't obscure that in any way. So yeah, all right, so I've got her down and I need a sentiment. So I bring in these Tim Holtz metallics that have the gold words on it. And I was looking for something that said like measure or had some relation back to the ruler there. And this says make it count, which kind of makes sense, I suppose. So I've got that on there and I will bring in, because that is so dark, I'm going to bring in my Stabilo just to highlight a couple areas and add a little bit of shadow around my paper doll and around that bottom ruler. And once I get that on there, y'all, I think this is it for card number 29 for the Crafty Hopes prompts. I hope you like this. I hope you play along with these prompts, which are embossed paper, acrylic paint, and seam binding, or with the prompts that you pull yourself. If you have any questions about any of this, please don't hesitate to let me know. Give me a thumbs up if you like it, and make sure to subscribe. All right, guys, I will see y'all very soon. Thanks for watching. Bye.